Okay, this is manage your business like a pro with Cara Gardner on financial planning.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for spending your time to really get some good information on your personal finances, investing, and anything else you want to ask me questions about. We have a presentation, so I'll kind of go through that. If you have a question along the way, you can just stop me. A couple of housekeeping things. There is a sign-in sheet, thank you. And I did pass out a couple of pieces, so we'll talk about those throughout the presentation as well. But first things first, I just kind of want to know where everyone is in the room. So are we people who are currently invested, we're looking to get started, we're wondering if we're close to retirement, or all of the above? What do we have today? Anyone that's just trying to get started? Invested people are at least kind of somewhere along the process. Okay, great. Just so I can try to tailor it to those of you who took the time to be here today. So, okay, I could. Okay, so I broke it down into maybe 4 different subjects. So it's kind of the big picture first, of course, what are we saving for? What are we trying to invest for? Then best ways to kind of get there, types of investments, and then also managing risk, because risk is an important piece of, you do the saving, we do the investing, but we don't want to go backwards. So we want to make sure we're moving forward. So you got to manage the risk at some point as well. So we'll get started with the why kind of, or the reasons for investing. So typically I deal with predominantly retirement planning for people, but obviously sometimes, especially in your field, maybe we're saving to invest in another property, home, investment properties, things like that. Perhaps it's college planning for our family. Retirement planning, of course, is the big one. So it may be a variety of things, but you kind of need to start with what it is we're saving for first, or what your primary goals are, because it's very different depending on the timeline and what it is we're trying to accomplish. So, I'd like to kind of start there. And also, what else are we doing to prepare ourselves to invest? So are we, do we have that emergency fund? Do we already have the savings and do we have debts paid down? In the packet of stuff I gave you is a cash flow worksheet. So how many people actually budget, have some kind of, plan for what comes in and like knowing kind of what goes out? Okay. So you may have something, my husband has an Excel spreadsheet, he knows every dollar we've spent for the last 20 years, but some people are just not that way and that's fine. But it's good to have a handle on at least the basics, right? What is it that we're saving for? How much am I going to need to get there? And then does that work? Can I actually save what I need? So the first place to start really is kind of that cash flow budgeting and just what money is coming in, what money is going out. Now in your world, in the real estate profession, that can be challenging, right? Because we're commissioned and it comes in waves, it comes in big chunks or droughts, or, it's sort of unpredictable sometimes. So it's helpful to have a budget just to know what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then as the dollars come in, if you've got that 6-month emergency fund that we talked about, now you can start to actually do something on a little more regular basis, monthly, quarterly, at least annually. If you have the big picture in mind and know what it is you have extra. If you take, the last couple of years of how you've done and your income for the last couple of years, you average it out, you guess at where you think you'll be this year, maybe where the minimum you hope to be, you can kind of back into it that way. So it's still possible, even though you might feel challenging when you have a straight commission setup, it's still very doable. Cash flow budgeting still helps. We just maybe back into it a little bit differently than you would if you were salaried or something like that. So a couple of things when it comes to saving. I like to start with healthcare sometimes because unfortunately it's one people often forget. Especially if you're in a field where you're paying for your own healthcare, where it's not perhaps covered by a company. That is the highest running inflated situation right now is healthcare costs. They're going up faster than anything else, even faster than education, which we'll get to in a minute. So it's a very real conversation you need to have with yourself about what's that going to look like in retirement? When do you plan to retire? If it's any time before 65, before you get to Medicare, we need to talk about that. That could be quite expensive for a single person or for a married couple. If your significant other perhaps doesn't have the healthcare coverage, it's definitely something you want to pay attention to. So it's always something I point out because it's often something people neglect to think about. And of course, in our country, we've got a kind of a healthcare, expense issue. A lot of people are over 65 now. We've got a whole baby boom generation that's just aging every year. And that's a real hot topic at the moment. People are trying to figure out exactly how we're going to manage that going forward and making sure everyone is covered. And so there may be some changes down the road. So it's just good to think about it, keep it at top of mind, know that those costs could be higher, but bake that into your retirement plan, into your income needs. And so there won't be any real surprises. We're going to kind of plan for that. So education costs. So that's the second fastest growing from an inflationary standpoint. Unfortunately, it's way more expensive even now than it ever used to be I can remember stories of my parents and clients and things who, worked for a contractor over the summer and put themselves through dental school the next year. I mean, that's just not happening today. Unfortunately, that's not a reality. So we need to really think about that. And oftentimes in my planning, parents, we all want better things for our kids. We want to do everything we can for them generally, but we also need to pay attention that we're taking care of ourselves first. Often if we're talking about education savings, I'm going to make you back up and talk about retirement planning first, because it's the whole thing on the airplane, right? The oxygen mask comes down. They tell you to put it on yourself first before you help others. There's a reason for that. You don't want to be the one that's in need in your later years in life or a burden on your family because all of a sudden you spend too much of your time trying to help them in the beginning. And, it's tough if you can't do both. Obviously, we'd love to be able to do all of the above, and some people can, but it's a good conversation to have just to make sure we're managing that process, that expectation. Are we taking care of ourselves first? Then what's left over we can use to help kids going forward. And obviously there are things besides just for your degrees, right? I mean, you all have licenses, maybe necessarily didn't need a degree, you might have one, but there are other things you can do to earn a living, to make money that didn't cost the cost of four-year college education. So there's lots of skills and technical schools and all kinds of things today. So we have real conversations with our kids now instead of just, oh, this is the path, this is the plan, go do and figure out what you want. Maybe we can be a little creative and think outside the box for a minute, and they do some classes from home, or, take a breath and try to figure out what it is they're really interested in. It's hard to know what you want to do the rest of your life at 18, so I'm certainly not doing the exact same thing I was. I thought I would do at 18. I thought I was going to be a dentist. You can believe that. So pretty different from being a financial advisor. So I think, sometimes you just want to make sure we're thinking about the big picture and we're trying to be efficient when it comes to what we're going to spend on education. So take care of yourself, retirement first, then education. But unfortunately, at an inflation rate of maybe 8%, the cost of college could double every 9 years. So, if you've got a kid now somewhere along that path, it's very real. My son's 11, so 9 years from now, he's going to be in college. So, that's kind of a tough number to swallow sometimes. But it doesn't mean you can't plan and you can't help and try to support that goal. But, it's good to be realistic about it and make sure we're taking care of ourselves first. So a lot of times, it's the question, like, can I retire? When can I retire? How much do I need to retire? Those are all the questions that we typically want answered. And you kind of have to back into it first from an income standpoint. So if you say to me today, think about what it would cost for you to be comfortable living in retirement from an income standpoint. Do you need $50,000? Do you need 100? Do you need 200? What makes you think, okay, I could pay all my bills, I could travel or golf or visit whoever, whatever it is you want to do with your retired years, and come up with a number today. Once we do that, now we think, okay, what's that number actually going to be when I retire? So if you're going to retire, say 12 years from now, and we think things will inflate at 3% a year, it's a little higher at the moment, but it should probably come back down to a more readily manageable number, like 3%. That might be $100,000 today, might actually be closer to $150,000 in 12 years. So we just need to kind of think about, where we are today, what we want, how long it is until you need that resource, And then we kind of extrapolate and say, okay, that's probably going to be about this much money. And then how do I get you there? What do we have to save or what add on to what you already have started to get to a number that can feed you that kind of income? So it's a process. You have to put some time and some energy and some thought into what you want. And then I can help you kind of guide that path down. But a lot of people are uncertain about that. These are just some statistics you can see on the screen here. 53% say they don't have enough income to save for retirement. That's a challenge, right? But that's where that budgeting can help kind of come into play. Well, if I needed to squeak out a few extra dollars every year to save, what could I change about my current situation to make that happen? Some of their debt is interfering. Definitely want to pay down some debts first, right? Especially things that are higher interest rates, student loans. It's, kind of a question, but things like revolving credit, of course, you guys are all in the business. You tell people probably all the time with credit reports and things, okay, well, don't pay it off, but let's maybe take care of some of this and it helps you qualify, things like that. Same thing when you're trying to save for retirement. You got to take care of your emergency fund first, pay off any of those high interest debts. Then we can start saving. Not necessarily every car and house, and you don't need to be debt free. Sometimes leverage is good, especially if you got, took advantage of some low rates and things like that. But that's definitely something to handle before you get into the savings mode. Some people say you don't plan to retire. That's very few. Most people would like to at least stop at some point. Or you should realize that at some point you may have to, right? I mean, it's just not physically or mentally conducive. At some point in your career, you're going to want to take a break. And then some people, 58% say they plan to work at least part-time. I do have lots of clients that do that. Some people consult, or especially in your field, you could sell a little bit of real estate, perhaps, depending on your situation in the brokerage and, that kind of a thing. So I suppose it's possible, but maybe you've built up an investment portfolio. Now you have some nice passive income, rental income from that portfolio. That may be the way you sort of manage those instead of actively doing listings and some of the other grind that you've been doing so long. So a lot of people do that. A lot of people take kind of a step back or do something they're more interested in that pays them less, just to kind of keep active and do something. So think about a plan B or what you would be doing in retirement. A lot of times people retire in their 60s and they're still pretty young, and they have a lot of life and things to give yet. So they don't always want to do nothing. So just think about that. And then 72% say they're concerned Social Security will not be there. How many people have that concern in the room? Okay, so, we'd like to say it's all going to be fine, everything's fine, right? But it is a concern I definitely can appreciate. And I think that there will probably be some changes, right? And anything, we're going to have to make some tough decisions, whether that means they, increase the amount for the income level of people that are paying in, whether they increase the age at which you can start taking it. There's a lot of things on the table, depending on which administration you ask. So, certainly there may be some changes coming, but I have a feeling they'll do something that makes it so there's something there. Okay, I think it's unlikely to think that it would just be gone, but it's okay if we consider ourselves conservative and we want to plan just in case, or what if it's less, or what if I have to work longer or something like that. So I'm definitely mindful of that, especially with my younger clients right now. We're saying, hey, what if you had to be 67 or 70? You can't start at 62 or 65, so those are things that you can kind of build into your planning, the what ifs and the just in cases that would make you more comfortable overall about your plan. Yeah.
Is there a way to project what that amount is going to be?
Yes, absolutely. So if you go to the irs.gov website, you can log in, and you should. I would recommend everyone do this to create an ID for your Social Security. And it will literally tell you where you are currently. It'll extrapolate out an estimate of where you will be at different age points. It's good, useful information. If you're doing any kind of planning with myself or another advisor, you want to know those figures because it's definitely something to factor in. So good question. So set those up. Let's see. So, again, we've talked a little bit about inflation. Obviously, right now, it's a main topic. It's something that we're trying to bring down. The whole situation with COVID and all of the money pumped into the system and coming out of it has created a really tough scenario. So something that doesn't happen all the time, but certainly things that people, the government and we as a country have tried to manage in the past. So, we're hopeful that we've kind of got a handle on it. It's starting to come down. Some signs are pointing to positive things. Not all signs are positive. Maybe we end up with some recessionary periods later this year. But at any rate, it's something we need to pay attention to. We always build it into modeling to planning, like I was saying about what's your dollar today worth when you actually retire. So it's a real number, but it generally evens out in the long term to a more tenable figure than where it is currently. Okay, so some tools for building wealth. We talked about goal setting, the why, what's the plan, what are we trying to accomplish? Then obviously there are types of investments, there are different kinds of investments, but there are also different investment vehicles, right? So, we pay attention to taxes a lot in my firm. There's all different kinds of ways to invest. So we'll touch on a couple different types of accounts and pros and cons and maybe what might work best for people in your situation. So, we'll go through some of that, but now we're getting into kind of the how part of investing. So once you've, set your goals, determined how much you're going to need, risk tolerance is another thing I mentioned a little bit in the beginning that we talk about risk. So, a lot of people will say, okay, I'm good, I'm young, I know I have lots of time, I'm very aggressive, I just want to, dollar cost average, I want to buy in as often as possible, and I want to get it to grow as much as possible because I know I can weather any market storms and economic situations, et cetera. But then obviously there are other clients who are, well, I don't know, I've done some saving, I'm a little closer to retirement, I need to be a little more mindful of not going backwards. I only have so many years left in my plan. So you might have a different tolerance for risk, but that's definitely something to talk about, and not just in a way where the advisor says to you, here's what I think it should be. Because then within those two scenarios, there's a variety of people who've had different experiences, who are more and less risk tolerant within even those categories. So really, you want to have conversations with your advisor. Hey, I do not like to lose money. I understand I may have to give up some upside, some growth potential, but I'm a good saver. So I'm gonna, do that. And we're gonna try to be a little more conservative. Or you're like, hey, I need to squeeze every inch of growth out of these dollars I'm saving. I have a time horizon that's reasonable. So I want to be a little more aggressive and try to get the long-term averages of the stock market. So you really want to kind of think about how you feel in those situations and make sure that that's reflected in your plan and that someone's paying attention to how you feel about that. And the emergency fund, I always say you need at least 3 months of your main bills, but in your field, especially if you're straight commissioned like I am, you want to have maybe 6, someone who owns a business, someone who may have fluctuating cash flows. I think it's more prudent to have closer to 6 months in an emergency fund. So, that's kind of the standard, if you will. That's where I would start in that situation. Okay, so investment options. How many people, here have stocks or bonds or mutual funds or ETFs, maybe? Obviously real estate, you're all pretty comfortable with that. Cash, CDs, different kinds of things, right? Commodities, gold, et cetera. Those are kind of the main things you can invest in. Most things fall into one of those kind of 5 categories, if you will: stocks, bonds, cash, real estate, and commodities. That's pretty much it. So, but within those 5 base categories, there are a wide range, obviously, of types of investments, things that have different risk levels, so again, now we're getting into okay, how should we build a portfolio for you based on what you've told me, what your goals are, the risk and the time horizon on your plan? How do we get you there? So stocks, of course, most people understand, what those are. Owning a company, a piece of it, those are typically the market. And if you look at the market, over the long term, you can see large cap and small cap, and they're getting maybe 10, 11, 12% on long-term averages. That's kind of how a stock return would be, what your expected return would be. But obviously individual stocks can go to 0. Companies can fail. That has happened. I have some wallpaper and different frames in my office of things that are no longer with us. So, that's a very real thing. And so we definitely want to make sure, how we invest in stocks and how many in different sectors, and do we do it through a mutual fund, or, how are we picking the market side of our portfolio can really matter. Because again, the other side of the coin typically is the bond side, or the more inherently conservative side, but really it's just the debt side, right? It's something that often pays a coupon or a nice dividend to you. That piece of it was a little bit challenged last year. The bond market in about last 70, 80 years never went down like it did last year. So that unfortunately was really tough. If you had a 60% equity stock, 40% bond portfolio, your whole portfolio went down pretty substantially last year. So that was really rough on a lot of people's net worth and their incomes or their savings and things like that. But, you know, you need to understand kind of how those work and how to use it in your overall portfolio. And like I said, there are, 5 things, it's not just 2. So there are other vehicles and other investments that sometimes you can build into a portfolio, maybe some, hedging type of investments or real estate or some other pieces that might help us weather storms like the one we had last year. So hopefully you've got some diversification in your portfolios or what you're looking at right now that you've already started. If not, that's a question to ask. What other tools, what other kinds of investment vehicles are there besides the typical, stock bond components? They've gotten pretty creative, I will say. There are a lot of different options out there that we use. So, it's not just your standard 60-40. And a lot of times too, if you have, like a 401k or something, they'll give you kind of a target fund, which often is just stock and bond. So a lot of those struggled a bit last year because they're not all as diverse perhaps. So you just want to make sure you understand what it is you're in. If you've selected something kind of, the date on it or had a fund or had this kind of fund, just make sure you know what it will do for you in good times and in bad. And obviously cash equivalent CDs, things like that right now is not a bad time for some of those products. So people have been able to be a little bit more risk adverse perhaps and get some decent return. Now, obviously, you're still trying to keep up with inflation at the moment, but the fact that you can get a money market account in the 4.5% range is something we haven't seen in quite some time. So, it has happened before, but it's certainly not happened in recent memory. So, there are things out there that have lower risk and lower risk that are actually getting a little bit better return. But how long that will last, we're not real sure because, right, we've got this Fed that's raising rates, but at some point it probably won't stay. They want to raise it to an uncomfortable place. But the fact is it will be uncomfortable. So at some point it will probably come back down a little bit. And so will those cash or cash equivalent rates as well. They'll probably tweak back down a little. Will it go down to where it was? Who knows? Probably not. But, likely it will go up a little bit more and hold, perhaps come back down, depending on who you ask and which day you ask it. But the expectation is it may not stay there forever, but something to take advantage of while it is where it is. So obviously with you guys, real estate kind of falls in between the orange and the blue, right? Between the stocks and bonds as far as a risk relationship goes. Cash and cash equivalents being the most conservative, stocks being the most aggressive because the stock can go to zero. Real estate typically doesn't go to zero, right? It may have ups and downs, but it does kind of fall in that more risky market category as far as, if you're looking at this pyramid here, that's kind of where that piece falls. But also in the return potential too, right? It's a category that can do well depending on when you bought it, if you've enhanced the property at all and how long you hold it and things like that. So it definitely kind of falls in that mid to top part of this grid. And so, like I said, there are different ways to invest in the market or equity positions or the stocks. And some of it is mutual funds. ETFs is another way that's become quite popular. An ETF kind of has all of the stocks in a certain category, depending on what the ETF is in. If it's a US large cap following the S&P 500, it's going to have basically most or all, almost all of those. Versus some mutual funds that are managed may not have all of them. They're trying to do a little bit better than that. Now the cost will be different, right? The one that's more managed is going to cost a little bit more from an expense standpoint than the broad category in an ETF. But, again, we're trying to decide what is it I'm looking to accomplish? What's my time horizon? Am I willing to take on a little more expense if I think they're going to do better? Things like that. So again, many ways to invest in the stock market. Okay, so investment options for tax savings. So like I mentioned, there are a bunch of different vehicles, right? So where do I put the dollars that I'm going to save for retirement. Do I just put it in the bank? Do I want to, if I want to buy some stocks or different investments, I'm going to need some kind of investment vehicle, some kind of brokerage account, something with an advisor, things like that. But then there's the tax side of it. So, how many of you have like an IRA or an SEP or an old 401k or something in that zone? Those are all qualified dollars. So all the dollars went in pre-tax, which means you pay them on distribution, right? So there are a variety of ways to get into those types of vehicles. And in your space, in the real estate market, from your standpoint, again, you may have this kind of fluctuating cash flow throughout the year, but towards the end of the year, now we sort of know how well we've done, where our income might fall. And you may say, okay, I'd like to contribute to some kind of pre-tax vehicle so that I can, knock some of that income off my tax return before I owe taxes on it. Which one makes the most sense? Well, IRAs generally, if you're under 50, you can put in $6,500 a year. If you're over 50, you can put in $7,500 a year. That's one way. The SEPs or simple plans or some other retirement type plans could offer more than that, but it depends on your income, and you kind of need to do some calculations to find out. But there are ways to save more than those simple IRA limits. It just kind of depends on the person and the household income, and if you file jointly and single and all that happy stuff. But there are definitely ways to save a little bit more if you had an outsized year, perhaps. So I have some real estate clients, realtor clients, and so some of them have SEPs, some of them, depending on what their spouse does and things like that. We kind of create the right vehicle for them to do their savings in when we're looking for pre-tax. Now the other two categories, there's pre-tax. Oh, yeah.
Is there, for the sub accounts, is there like a max?
Yes, there is. I think it's 61,000, but it's also a max of your income, which roughly comes out to be about 20% of your gross. You have to do some calculating, but typically, yeah. So, again, check the limits, do some calculations, find out what you can put in, but that can help with the tax situation now, today, currently. Down the road, taxes matter, right? When we're in retirement, we talk a lot about that in my firm. So when you get to retirement, sometimes it's nice to have diversity of tax situation of your dollars as well. If all you've ever saved to save money on taxes now is the pre-tax kind, well, now you have full income tax distributions in retirement, which, is not always a terrible thing, but most of my clients aren't trying to retire poorer than they are currently living. So, a lot of times people say, oh, I'll be in a lower tax bracket. Well, maybe, if you're trying to be comfortable like you are today, down the road, you may or may not. You may have a nice amount saved and want to live. Some people like to travel more and do more things. When you spend all of your time enjoying yourself instead of working, tend to spend a little bit more too, My husband always says fun's not free, so sometimes you tend to get out there and spend a few more dollars and even maybe realize you want it in retirement. So, I think we try to just make sure, what does that look like from an income generating standpoint? If we're using Social Security, if we're pulling from those IRAs or those SEP accounts, what about the other two categories? So the other two categories are non-retirement accounts or non-taxable. We just put the money in. It's after tax dollars. We put it in some kind of brokerage investment account. That's taxes ordinary, or that's taxes capital gains when we have returns that we take out of that, versus ordinary income, which is what your IRA and your SEPs are taxed at. And then there's the third category, which is Roth. Anybody in here have a Roth IRA? Good. So Roth dollars are after tax dollars that go into the account, and it grows tax-free. And so all of your gains and everything you pull out in retirement is actually tax-free. There's no income tax or capital gains tax. So that's a unique bucket to get into, and something we talk about quite a bit, because, if you're trying to build a plan for someone and kind of keep you within tenable tax brackets in your retirement years, you may want to have that flexibility of a Roth account too, to say, okay, well, I can take this much out of my IRA, but the other 15,000 or 20, I'm going to pull out of this account. Now my tax bracket stays a little bit more manageable. So having a Roth IRA could be very useful in your retirement planning. It is a little bit trickier to get into. It is also the same contribution limits as far as $6,500 for under 50-year-olds per year and $7,500 for over 50. but there are income restrictions. So sometimes you can't make a contribution if you made too much income for the year. So again, it depends on you and or your spouse, married filing jointly. Yeah, so they change every year. I have them on, I think I can get you the tax form afterwards, but roughly it's like 230, 220 something for a married couple and 140 something for a single person, but I'll double check the numbers for you, but definitely those change every year. And it just went up a little bit this year because of inflation, like the other things that went up. You know, your tax brackets and things will change based on inflation as well. You know, everybody who saw the cost of living adjustment and their social security checks, that affects a lot of the tax table too, because a lot of those numbers are kind of variable depending on that. So, you know, some of those numbers go up. That's why you see some of the ranges change every year. It's generally because of inflation. So something to watch for where you fall in those limits. There are some ways to get money into Roth accounts, even if you can't contribute. You can do Roth conversions. You know, so sometimes people have IRA dollars or old 401ks or things, and they maybe want to take a piece of it. You don't have to do all or nothing. You can take a small amount or a dollar amount that you're comfortable with. You make a conversion during a tax year, and then you pay the taxes before April the next year, longer if you extend. So, you know, that's something that some people will do a little bit here and there to try to stay within certain tax brackets, of course, during your working years, but maybe you can get a little bit of those IRA dollars over to Roth dollars, you know, before you get to retirement. And just so you know, too, a Roth IRA, you do not have to have required minimum distributions. Those things that come up now at 73 years old, used to be 70 and a half, then it was 72, now it's 73. So sometimes we'll have a plan for a client, you know, between now and 73, we convert little bits of their IRA perhaps to get over there. But, you know, Roth conversions and Roth dollars are more helpful if you're younger or if you have more years before you turn 73, because you have more time for that compounded growth to really accumulate in a tax-free bucket for your benefit. So, you know, it's a personal situation on whether or not it makes sense for you, but those are just options out there. Those are things that are very real and useful tools in a planning concept.
So is it a good option for, so my daughter graduated from college, so I told her to open like a Roth IRA and contribute a certain amount on each paycheck. Because you can't borrow from it, right?
Right, you can't do a loan.
Yeah, so I mean, is that the best thing that I should be encouraging my kids?
I love a Roth IRA for young people because again, you have that much more time for it to compound. So imagine, you know, whether you put money into an IRA or a Roth, you put a couple $1,000s into it, and someday it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you only put 5 in and it's worth 200,000, you put in, you know, $5,000 into the Roth, all those gains are tax-free to you versus the 5,000 you put in to the IRA, all of those gains are still taxable. So again, the longer time period you have, the more likely that pool of resources to accumulate and double and grow, the better off you are. So often it's a great idea for younger people. Plus, the younger side of the working population tends to have lower incomes as well, too, right? And still can contribute. You know, they haven't hit those income earning thresholds yet, perhaps. So that often is more available to them to do as well. So sometimes it's a great place to start. But like IRAs and Roth IRAs, they're generally designed to not be used until you're 59 and a half. You know, there are stipulations on fees or, you know, how you can get out of it. If money back out of it, there are some rules and certain exceptions that you can, but generally you want to contribute to those thinking that it's just for retirement, that you're planning to keep it in there for the long haul.
Yeah, I wanted to do something.
Yeah, I mean, technically, there are reasons you could take it out, but if you just kind of set it and forget it and think that this is my long-term, what I'm putting in here, I don't need, I won't miss, not going to think about, you know, from a usable standpoint, then it's a great plan because it can really grow well for them.
So it'd be an ignorant question, but if we,
It's only ignorant if you don't ask.
if we have an LLC,
Yes.
but I file jointly with my husband and we are outside of the bracket for the Roth, is my LLC able to contribute to a Roth?
No, a Roth IRA is an individual retirement account. So just like an IRA, there are business-friendly vehicles on the IRA side of things, but not necessarily. There is a 401k Roth. So depending on, if the business had a 401k or something, perhaps you could look into, but an LLC, you'd want to check with some tax people and kind of figure that piece out for you, depending on if you have employees and all of those fun things. So there are some ways to get creative. There are non-deductible IRAs. You can contribute into an IRA and immediately convert it to Roth before it grows or is invested. And then you can invest. So, again, there are some stipulations, and then the IRA, though, still has those contribution limits per year. So again, there are some ways to get creative and try to get into that space, but it's a little more challenging. Good. So, okay. All right, let's see. So risk strategies, control risk. There are a couple of different things besides just, I mentioned some investment vehicles and things, but a couple of different ways. I'm sure many of you are familiar with just basic asset allocation, right? Diversification of what you're doing. You're not buying one stock, you're buying maybe a handful or some mutual funds and some bonds and some real estate. We're kind of spreading out every piece or, component you add to your plan lowers the risk for the plan. So what you're looking for is something that lowers the risk quite a bit without maybe giving up too much of the return. And every time you do that, you just put yourself in a little bit better position to kind of see that meet your goals without exposing yourself to too much risk to do it. So a lot of people are familiar with that, but then there's dollar cost averaging also, which is something we use quite a bit. It's kind of the concept of buying stuff on sale, right? Everybody loves a good sale. So what you do is you make a commitment and you purchase shares of something, or you invest dollars into a vehicle, and you do it consistently. So a lot of 401ks come out of people's accounts at work every paycheck, which is twice a month sometimes. Or you could do it monthly or quarterly or annually. Even annual dollar cost averaging over a long period of time is still helpful, right? Because if the idea is that generally year over year, over long periods of time, the stock market tends to go up. If you bought along the way, you were most certainly buying at some point at a dip, right? Or at some kind of discount to the overall market. So the idea is you could even do better if you consistently buy the same dollar amount or same number of shares over time, because some of those points along the way, they'll be less expensive. Like you can see in March, they were $12 versus in January, they were $15 a share. But if you bought the same number you bought in March that you did in January, February, April, but throughout the whole process, your average share price, you can see of what it's worth is $14.17, but what you paid was $14.05. So it just kind of helps accumulate, a position or, shares in an investment over a period of time that takes advantage of the fact that the market's not a straight line, right? That it's jagged and it's volatility and it goes up and down. And you sometimes will be that discount buyer if you do this dollar cost averaging, this averaging out of your share price over a period of time. So it's a useful tactic. And then, there's other things like buy and hold versus trying to time the market. A lot of people, even right now, will ask me, oh, well, I just feel like recession's coming, but we're not there yet. And are we trying to catch a falling knife, or what, what's the situation? When do I get in? So unfortunately, the market is volatile and it makes those adjustments, but it does it pretty quickly. So, over a long period of time, if you tried to time the market, but you missed even 10, that second bucket down, missed 10 of the best days, you can see the difference in your overall returns and your overall portfolio. So there is some value long-term to being a constant owner or a fully invested person. It's hard sometimes when the market is fluctuating or it's volatile and there's a lot of uncertainty to stay the course. But depending on your situation, of course, right? If you're a retired person and you're distributing, that might look a little different for you than if you're a young accumulating person. So sometimes you have to make adjustments based on your needs, but overall, don't just let yourself make knee-jerk reactions just because things seem scary, because you just don't know. It's so hard to perfectly time when to get out and when to get back in. Even just missing some of those first couple of days can really make a long-term effect on a plan. So staying invested can be a good thing. Okay, so, again, big picture all the way down. So what are our goals? Why are we doing this? What are we trying to accomplish? How much, doing our cash flow worksheets and figuring out what we can do. And in your space, when we can do it. Maybe you aren't comfortable distributing or saving every single month, but maybe you reflect every quarter. Your income comes in, you kind of know your pipeline for the next quarter, and you see, okay, this quarter I'm going to set aside this. Most people should save at least 10% of their gross income every year. But depending on your individual plan, to get you where you need to be, it could be more or less, depending on what your savings goals are. But a general rule of thumb, pay yourself to at least something every year. And then, adjust your portfolio. We got to do some rebalancing. If you had a perfect plan of, certain percentage in stocks, certain percentage in real estate, bonds, et cetera, at the end of the year, something was up, something was down, it adjusted, the percentages may have changed. So every year you also need to kind of rebalance or shift that mix back to what the one you originally wanted. And so sometimes that means selling out of some gains in one category and buying low in another category. And, that behavior helps your plan grow more consistently as well. So, adjusting your portfolio, thinking about your risks and returns, those are going to change obviously over time, over your career, over your lifetime. Different points, different things go on, you get closer to retirement, et cetera. And then obviously people like myself are here to help. That's what we do. I make plans for people and we work those plans over the course of their life. So, make sure you're getting some information, some input there. So questions, do we have, somebody sneak in? Do we have any other questions from anyone on the topics? Yeah, no, go ahead.
How often should you be going over these?
Okay, good question. So generally in my practice, I see all of my clients at least once a year, sometimes twice, sometimes 3, 4 more. It depends kind of on, maybe what we've set up as a client relationship, but also what the needs are. Usually my younger accumulating clients are 1 to 2 visits a year, depending on where we are in their plan. My more closer to retirement or retired clients, it's sometimes more often, maybe 3, 4 times a year, just because we may be having cash flow conversations. We're managing it a little bit tighter because we want to make sure, we've got distributions going out perhaps and that sort of a thing. So, it really kind of depends on your timeline, but I'd say at least a couple times a year usually. Any other questions on specific things? There was one other piece I handed out that I'll make sure is also available to anyone online, but there was just a piece in the back kind of about Medicare and some of that. We talked a little bit about health insurance. So that's in there as well for you to kind of take a look at. A lot of times people want to retire before 65. The most expensive healthcare is from 60 to 65, right? Because they know at 65, you can get onto that happy government plan. So, if you tell me you want to retire at 62 or 63 or something like that, we may be doing some pretty serious healthcare insurance planning because that could cost, quite a bit for those last couple of years. But, some basic information in that flyer I handed out. So again, check out your irs.gov, figure out your Social Security, put that piece into your plan, think about how you want to live in retirement, factor all that in. We can extrapolate out what that dollar actually looks like in the future for you, and then how much you need saved to actually create income off of that pool of resource. That's sort of what I do is help people back into that figure and then just work your plan. You get out there, you sell some houses and save a few dollars of it and, get to retire someday.
Is there any way to accelerate growth? As far as if we feel like we started a little bit later?
Yeah, well, so yes. So there's 2 things that will accelerate growth, right? 1, you save more, or 2, it grows more. Okay, so now the question will become though, how much time do we have? How comfortable are you with the additional risk that comes with looking for higher growth investments? Sometimes people will say, no, I don't know that I want to do that. I just want to save more dollars. But then I have some clients that are like, yep, let's just pretend I'm not retiring for at least the next 7 years. Let's get a little more growth and hope we have a decent 7-year cycle in the markets. So a little bit of risk tolerance to answer the question, a little bit of timeline. But there's really only 2 ways: save more money or earn more. So, which, that's what I help people figure out too, like what's most appropriate for you. And sometimes the answer is you work 1 or 2 more years, right? I mean, maybe we make a goal to pay something else off before I get there. Or, there's ways to kind of work that plan a little bit. How much income did you think you wanted? Well, what if I need 15,000 less a year? How does that make my plan look? Because what if I decide we're just gonna be really diligent and pay off our house before that point? We were thinking we'd just keep it, but now what if we do that? So there are lots of things. I have some software I utilize with people that helps us look that data dump and funnel it out to your specific situation, and then we can change and tweak things. We try to break it. Well, what if we did this? Or what if we retire earlier? It kind of gives you some flexibility, but those are the types of things that we can work and tweak to see if we can get you there faster or better, So good question. Any other questions?
Were you able to email us that spreadsheet that you said you asked to use?
No, I cannot do that. But
Or even this one, do you have this one?
yeah, that I could email you. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send that one to you. I've told him for years he needs to turn it into an app or something. But but yeah, I can send you that, and I have some other things. You just reach out to me. I think everyone maybe put their name and email address on the list. I do have blogs and things if you'd like. You can sign up for those. I'll send everybody the first one, and if you want to kind of follow, there's some good information that comes out, not every day, but weekly. So keeping track of different things that are related to retirement. So definitely, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information, right? I've got 15 years advising, 10 years in banking before that. I've got a degree, 3 licenses, and a designation. So there's a whole funnel of financial things that come into play when it's, and then I have to kind of whittle it down for you specifically. So don't beat yourself up if there's stuff out there you hadn't heard about or aren't quite sure all the details of, because it's a lot, right? But that's where an advisor can help. And I do have some information that I could send out as well on kind of how I work with people if you guys are interested, whether it's my planning or my investment advice. I work both ways depending on the client needs. So I can send that out to you as well. And maybe I could be of more help. So